Okay, it's week 8 of HTML5 and AJAX. I'm Bill Marshall. Those are my email address and cell phone. Only use a cell phone during office hours. If you have questions during this or as a result of this presentation, send me an email and let's find out a time we get together and we'll have a Microsoft Team meeting, or we can just talk on the phone. Alright, it's for CIT 253. It's a 3-credit-hour course, data-driven web pages. And as always, Blackboard is the official place to get assignments and to turn in assignments, but if you want some supplemental information, that website is a parallel. So, history of HTML. Well, it all started with DARPA creating the internet. And that was really an outcome of trying to find a robust system to survive a nuclear attack, so that there was not one way, but there were many ways to get to the same place. And in CERN's in Switzerland, Tim Berners came up with the www, and then he invented HTML so that he could put up pages on the internet. And in 1993, Dave Raffet drafted a HTML Plus because this first one was pretty basic. And I'm not going to read it all the way down through here, but the net effect is, as time went along, more and more things got invented that you could do. But one of the problems they had was that every browser company would make extensions. So you'd have programs written for just Chrome or just Internet Explorer or the Microsoft version, Netscape, and so forth. So by the time they got down into the 2017s and probably back along in here, they tried to come up with a standard that would be browser agnostic. And one of the big things they did was come up with an AJAX. And we're going to talk about what AJAX is, but it was truly a web developer's epoch. And the reason is because up until then you had to submit a page, and so the user sat there and saw a complete page refresh, and while they waited for the page to come back, you were just waiting for the page to come back. But with AJAX, we can update a web page without reloading the page. We can request data from a server after the page is loaded. We can receive data from the server after the page is loaded. We can send data to a server in the background. AJAX is not a programming language. AJAX is a technique for accessing web servers from a web page. AJAX stands for Asynchronous, JavaScript, and XML. So here's a sample of the type of code that we're talking about. We're going to see a lot of divs, and so here's a div demo, and then the heading 1 and a button, and we've got an action that says on click we're going to load doc and then change the contents to tell what the button's about and the end of the div. Then we get to a script to tell its JavaScript that it's starting. And here's our load doc function. And we're going to talk a lot about these again, but we see that we're opening with the get that file. And if we look at the AJAX info.txt that it's pulling, it simply looks like this. And don't worry about how all that works. That's what we're going to talk about today. But if we save that program in our NotePad++ and then save that AJAX info file and put it in the doc root, when we run the program, and notice it doesn't have to be PHP, we're using HTML right now because everything's happening on the client side at this point. And here's our button. And when we push it, in fact, it changes the div to say AJAX and what we expected it to. So we've been eliminated from the need for submit button. And the first major program that I saw doing this, and it just fascinated me, was Google Maps. Think about all the things you can do with Google Maps, and you never have to submit a page. And that was the world to come, and now you're going to know how to work in it. So how does AJAX work? Well, the browser creates an HTTP request object. And that request object is created by JavaScript. The HTML request object sends the request to a web server. The server processes the request, and the server then sends the response back to the web page. So here it comes back, and then the browser reads the JavaScript, and it does whatever it's supposed to do based on what JavaScript does. So this XML/HTTP request object is going to be pretty important. And the good news is that all modern browsers support it. And that's what's helping. We're not quite there yet, but what's helping get us from the, well, this was written for Chrome, or this was written for Microsoft Edge, or whatever. One of the reasons that I have used Chrome so much, though, is because the power of Google Docs and Google Maps and Google itself has made many people standardize on the Chrome browser. But as I say, over the time, the browsers tend to be coming together. This XML/HTTP request object can be used to exchange data with a server behind the scenes. That means it's possible to update parts of a web page without reloading the whole page. Alright, so you're going to create an XML/HTTP request object, and all the modern browsers will do it. The syntax for creating an XML/HTTP request object is a variable. You're creating a new class, basically, and then you're going to new in this class. So for security reasons, the modern browsers do not allow access across domains. And I took this, and I'll tell you later where I took this, these points from a W3 schools tutorial, and they say that the file tries to load, it must be on the same server. I don't think that's right. I don't think it has to be on the same server. It definitely has to be on the same domain, but you can buy wildcard SSL certs so that you can use the same SSL cert for stober.com and data.stober.com, and so you can have lots of different servers all on the same SSL cert. And as long as you're on that same SSL cert and in the same domain, I believe that you can run these AJAX requests. Get or post. Get's simpler, faster than a post, and it can be used in most cases. However, always use a post request when a cached file is not an option. Update a file or a database on the server, so that you don't want to take a chance of hitting cache. You need to use a post, because if you do a database request and hit cache, you may not be getting the current status of the database. And so, in my opinion, the real answer is always use the post request. If you're sending large amounts of data to the server, because the post doesn't have any size limitations, and sending user input, which contain unknown characters. Post is more robust and is secure than get. Alright, get requests. An example is XHTTP.open get where the server is, and then a true or false, and then XHTTP.send. Another example is the same, but notice that they're now filling in things on the URL so that we're sending data in the open. And you can concatenate with the ampersand sign, as you see there. Post requests, XHTTP.open, and then the command post, where you're going, and then a true or a false, and XHTTP send. Here's an example where we're sending more than we had before, and we're using the send to move data. F name is Henry and L name is Ford. The method is set request header, and value. Your adds an HTTP header to the request. The header specifies the header name, and the value is specified there. A URL, the URL is a file on a server. The URL parameter of the open method is the address that you're going to go get the program that you're going to run on the server. But notice that you can't say, and so maybe they were right, you can't say Google Doc or google.com/Ajax test. It assumes it's going back to the same domain that it came from. A file can be any kind of file, like a text, an XML, a server script. All this says is that it's going to go do whatever Ajax_test.asp, whatever it does. And what it does is going to be a function of what the server thinks that file does. And when it runs, the server is going to sending the response back. Okay, asynchronous, true or false. Server requests should be sent asynchronously. The async parameter of the open method should be set to true, as in true. By setting the asynchronous, JavaScript does not have to wait for the server response, so it can execute other scripts while waiting, deal with the response from after response is ready. The other thing it does is it lets users read a big page all the while that you're still getting data and finishing it out. The onreadystatechange property. We're going to talk about the ready state, but we can have something happen when on ready state change. And you can define a function to be executed when the request receives a ready state change. The function is defined in the onReadyStateChange property of the XML response object. So here's an example. We're saying that this ReadySetChange, onReadyChange, we're going to do a function, and that function is between here and here, and if, and we're going to talk about this test, it's going to document and get the element, the ID, and so it's going to change the inner HTML on that element. And it's going to take the response, it says text, and put it in that HTML element. And here's the open and the send. To execute a synchronous request, change the third parameter in the open to false, as in this. Sometimes async false is used for quick testing. You'll also find the synchronous request on older JavaScript code. Since the code will wait for the server completion, there's no need for an onReady state change because nothing's going to happen until it comes back. And so here's a false showing you how. A synchronous request slows page load, which is not good. It's equivalent to saying, I don't care how long it takes. The synchronous XML HttpRequest async equals false is not recommended because the JavaScript will stop executing until the server response is ready. And so if the server's busy or slow, or the network's slow, the application will hang. A synchronous XML HTTP request is in the process of being removed from the web standard. So that tells you exactly how much the standard thinks about it. Basically, it's a bad idea. Modern development tools usually will complain if you have a synchronous request. The onReadyChange property, the ready state property holds the status of the XML request. The onReadyChange property defines a function to be executed when the ready state changes. And so ready state has these positions. The request is not initialized, the server's connection is established, the request is received, it's processing the request, and the request finished and the response is ready. Your status 200 means everything's happy. 403 is a forbidden, you can't do that. 404 is it couldn't find what the link you were asking for. And there's more. The status text returns the status text, OK or not found. The onReadyStateChange function is called every time the ready state changes. And when ready state is 4 and the status is 200, the response is ready. And so that's why you're going to see a lot of if ready state equals 4 and the status is 200, then do something. The onReadyStateChange event is triggered 4 times. Each time it goes up 1, 2, 3, and 4. Using a callback function. Because JavaScript is often running, we have to tell it what to happen when it gets an answer back. If you have more than one AJAX task on a website or on a web page, you should create one function for executing the XMLHttpRequest object and one callback function for each AJAX task, because otherwise you come back and you've got a state 4 and status 200, but you don't know, it's done, but you don't know which one's done. The function should contain the URL and what function to call when the response is ready. So here's an example. We have this function that's going to load the doc and do what we want it to do. And we want this one, when we call the function, to use URL 1 and the result to happen at the end to be my function 1. But when we call it this time to go to this URL, we want it to be function 2. So this will support that. That load doc will support that because we were passing in the function we wanted. And down here we have the 2 functions. So if it calls my function 1, it's coming to this. But if it went to the other URL, it would call that. So server response properties, you can have the property of responseText gets the response data as a string, or responseXML and gets it as an XML data. And we're going to talk a whole lot more about JSON and XML next week. Most of what I'm going to do this week is just trying to demonstrate using this AJAX, and we're going to be using responseText. The methods that you have on server response are you can get the response header, which gets you specific information, or you can get all the response headers, which returns all the header information from the server resource. The responseText property. The responseText property returns the data as JavaScript string, and you can use it like the document, get the element, demo, set its inner HTML to whatever came back on the response. So here's an example where we're doing just that. The responseXML property returns the server response in an XML DOM object, and you're using this property you can parse the response. So if we requested the file cd catalog.xml, the parse response would look like that. Again, we're going to do XML next week. And here's the program that does that. And you can come back and look at that at your leisure, but we're basically going to use the text this week. Or what we have just looked at is Introduction to the AJAX tutorial in W3 schools. And I give them all creative credit for these points. And I would advocate that you benefit because they have lots of places where you can try each example by using that URL, which I won't read to you because you can get it off the PowerPoint. So now let's try to actually use this, and we're going to recreate the week 7 program, but we're going to do it with AJAX so that the page does not need to reload. So our goal is user selects a valid state, and when they select all, they can see all the contacts of that state and never have to reload the page. So the program starts out just like it was. Well, we changed first PH to first PH plus AJAX. And this form action last week looked like that. But now it's just going to be form and then the bracket. All this will go away on the code that you will see later and that you can download. And we're going to have a label for the form of state and choose a state, and a select state code equals name. Still looks a lot like it did before. And we're going to put this option value no selection yet option in. And yes, we're still using PHP to generate this page because I didn't want to hard code the states. I still like the ability to have hit the database. So I'm basically just modifying the PHP code we had last week and renaming the file. So we're opening the database, and here's the username and password, and we're going to create a connection. But that's really bad if we know that we can use the browser to look at the code that comes back from the web server. But when we look, we find out that it's not there, and it's not there because all those connections and everything were the PHP code, and the PHP code generated this web page code, and so we don't need to worry about the password. And in fact, when we look at the actual code in larger scale so we can see it, we see none of the password stuff came back, so we don't have to worry about that as a security issue. So we were here, and then we checked the connection, and we selected just like we did before, and we built the select just like we did before. And now comes where we start the AJAX. We entered the select, and we said button type button, on click, load contact, show contacts, ended the button in the form, and we set up a div contacts, which is where we're going to have a place for AJAX to write. And then we ended the div. And now we get to the script load contact that we'd called over here. And I could have probably gotten all this in one statement, but I wanted to make it more obvious what I was doing. So I used the DOM to get an element by the ID state code and got that class, initiated that class, and then used that class to find its option. And I found that option by using that class as selected index, and that was the option. And the parameter I'm going to send in is going to be state code plus opt.value. Now I will tell you that when I was debugging this code, I had a space between the equal sign and the quote mark, and it didn't work. And alert, this is where I was trying to see what I had in param. And you'll often, when you look through my old code, see places where I've commented out alert statements for debugging. Alright, so now we're getting ready to create a variable XHTTP, which is going to be an XMLHttpRequest class. And I'm onreadyChange doing a function, and here's the contents of that function. And so if the state's 4 and the status is 200, i.e. we're finished and we're happy, it's okay, we're going to document, get an element ID contracts, enter HTML, and whatever we get back from our AJAX call, we're going to put into there. So all that was what to do on the change. Now we're down to, we're going to open as post a file called statecon.php. True, we're going to do it asynchronously. We're sending the header information, and we're setting our parameter, which we created up here. The end of the script. And now what is statecon.php look like? Well, it looks like a PHP starts. We got to open this connection to the server, just like we did last week. We're setting our character set and making sure that we're not getting any SQL injection. Then if the connection's got an error, we're saying it failed. Otherwise, we're doing a select just like we did last week. And the difference in this code this week and last week is, last week we had to have it all wrapped up in the rest of what was required for the page. But now all we're doing is sending back, we've got to generate the XML that goes into that one div. So in the while statement, we're going to echo the state name, which has these contacts, and then we're going to open up our second select statement just like we did last week, and we're going to loop down through, well, no, first we're going to, if we found some rows, we're going to make a table. We're going to put a heading on the table, and then we're going to do a while loop for each row we get back. We're going to write the entries for that table, and when we get out of the while statement, we're going to echo the end of the table HTML, and then we've got the error connections if we didn't find any contacts or if we didn't have a state code. We're going to close the connection and we're done. So all we've done is generate the HTML we want in that div. So when we do the initial screen, it looks like this. And I just have the Chrome tools, developer tools open so that we can see if you're interested. When we pick a state and press show contents, it fills in the div, tells us what state, and lists the people. If we change the state and press show contacts again, we get another state. If we go back and see what happens if we have no selection yet and press the contacts button. We get no state has that code. So here we have a single page that's refreshing data without having to do a page submit, and we've entered the wonderful world of AJAX. Okay, your assignment for week 8 is create your own version of this AJAX page. I want your AJAX page to list all the possible state codes and state names, and then when the user selects one of that list, I want you to give me a table with first name, last name, and email address, just like you did last week. Again, my goal here is not to have you have to learn new PHP tricks or MySQLi tricks. The thing we're adding this week is using the AJAX so you don't have to submit the whole page. I want you to write another AJAX page that displays a selector of all the unique last names in the contacts table. When the user selects one last name, displays all the first names and cities of contacts with that last name. Again, just the same thing you did last week, but with doing it via AJAX. The other assignment is I want to see you to turn in your current work in progress of your class project proposal, your class project business rules, and the ERD for the class project. And as you can tell, what we're continually doing is refining, because we're fast approaching where you're going to have to actually start writing code, and there's nothing worse than spending a lot of time writing code and then finding out that the table structure that you built it on or the things that you were trying to attempt with the code aren't really what you need to do. Alright, I told you last week that we were going to handle jQuery this week. We didn't. We are going to look at other client-side tools next week, and the truth is jQuery is going to almost be a given. Given that you understand jQuery, then we're going to talk about what all else we can do. So you can get a head start by looking over this www.w3schools.com jQuery. That's week 8, HTML5 and AJAX of CIT 253 3 credit hours for data-driven web pages. If you have questions, and I will not be at all surprised if you do, email me at that email address or call me during business hours at that cell phone number. This, like any other technical thing, is once you understand it simple, but until then complex and obtuse. And my job is to try to figure out, and there are a million ways to say it, a way to present it so that it does make sense, because once the light comes on, this is really powerful material.